I was just around the topic of refueling virtual teams because it's so relevant at the moment, where teams are being forced to work remotely, and that's become the way of working now. And we're finding that a lot of teams are struggling, and the struggle seems to be around similar things. So I just thought I would share with you today some ideas in terms of what one needs to make sure of as a leader, but also then as a member of a virtual team, what are perhaps the things that you should take consideration of or keep in mind. And what we know is that previously, organizations and managers were quite reluctant to accept remote work. And it was mainly because they were struggling to understand or understand how will we measure productivity. How will we know if people have been productive? And then the issues there of trust, or how do we maintain the culture of the team or the company, etc. So those have been the top concerns for managers previously, but now, having been forced to go into the remote state of working, we're seeing that those concerns are still there, but we're finding ways in which to work around them or to, work with them better. So what I want to talk about today is really what is just the context and the challenges of virtual teams previously and now, but then also make some reference to what we can call healthy versus toxic teams. And then if we're building high-performing teams, what would be the key tips or the key elements to focus on. So since we are also physically having quite a lot of storms here today at the moment, this picture is relevant in the sense also that the storm of remote working has been on the horizon for a long time, and with fourth industrial revolution and everyone talking about the future world of work, anything from VUCA, which I know that you're all also tired of hearing, etc. It doesn't matter. We've all been knowing that there's lots of uncertainty, ambiguity, and stormy seas waiting for us. And that we were kind of preparing for. And some organizations were better prepared than others. And what we're finding now is with the arrival of, let's say, lockdown then in South Africa specifically, but all over the world also, we were all forced into the same storm, but we are not all in the same boats. And this goes whether we talk about individuals, whether we are referring to teams, whether we are referring to organizations. We're actually finding that we all have different skill sets, different readiness levels, and also different tools to help us guide this storm. So be very aware of that also in your own teams, therefore, and be cognizant of the fact that even though one person may be comfortable with it, it may not be the same for another, and that we all have our own different realities also as a team and as individuals to adjust to this new way of working. And we all know that it's not going to go away. What we're finding, and research is telling us, that there will probably be kind of a blended approach to remote working in future, rather than going back to exactly the way we were before. And I'm sure these are in any way things that you are discussing at a leadership level in terms of how do we reintegrate the workforce, who do we reintegrate back to the office, all those kinds of different scenarios that we need to contend with. So the main challenges of virtual teams before and now really are around key elements like trust, the relationships of people. It's also about the mental health. How do we innovate the morale of the team? And specifically some research from Dr. Karen Lajeski that found that trust and cooperation actually declines with 80%. And innovation with 90% when teams work remotely and they are not managed effectively. So it's really important that even though we are working virtually, we need to make sure that those teams are managed effectively. And this, so I mean, it's just a sort of confirming that for everyone. If we look at performing versus toxic teams as perhaps a way in which to just position what would be the difference, between a performing and a non-performing team, we know that performing teams are teams that have trust and that have a way of working. They know where the team is going, they are focused on getting those results, and they're also quite adaptable from a strategic perspective in being able to adjust what they do in the here and now with the aim of reaching the specific goals and the results. This is from research by Hogan as well. But then also looking at toxic teams, maybe just as the other side of the continuum, we find that there are the absence of the concepts on the left-hand side, but also the presence then of a lot of other factors. So for example, something like incivility, which is a low intensity, defiant behavior towards people. It is the politics that we are also scared of, the disengagement, power struggles between individuals, a lot of silence, especially in meetings, blaming, a lack of commitment, and then also definitely a lack of accountability and specifically no trust. So the behaviors that will take teams to being successful in inverse are also those behaviors that will actually lead to having quite a toxic environment. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the toxicity is becoming quite pandemic in organizations, unfortunately. It's not only COVID that's pandemic, it's also toxicity, where some of the research, just as a highlight here, where a company called Emtrain found that 83% of employees wouldn't, for example, report harassment if they saw it. And they also found that toxic workplaces are very common, and that 1 out of 3 people, or 30%, roughly 30% of employees, left their jobs due to workplace conflict. So we know that toxicity is quite pandemic, unfortunately, and that it's growing, and really, and in the chances of those seeds growing when people are working remotely. The question is there more chance for toxicity when we're working remotely, or if we are working together in real life? So that is some of the things I will also touch on a little bit later. The effect in organizations of toxicity, unfortunately, is all of those that I've got up on the screen. The creativity suffers, performance deteriorates, etc. We're losing our customers. But then the one surprising bit of research that also has come out from Stanford University by Professor Jeffrey Pfeiffer, was that it is in the United States, actually a toxic workplace is seen as or has been found to be the 5th leading cause of death, and that is higher than Alzheimer's or kidney disease. So definitely, as I'm saying, it's actually becoming a pandemic that we need to manage and make sure that we stay away from it, and that we you never actually on our way to it, really, to start off with, because it becomes quite a slippery slope once we start letting those behaviors fester and infiltrate the team, if we're talking about teams here, the team's culture. So their research actually showed that the mismanagement of workforces causes more than 120,000 deaths a year, and about 5 to 8% of annual healthcare costs. So it is extremely high, and those would be things like excessive work hours, work-family conflict, lack of control and autonomy, all of those things that are really, as they would then call the book, Dying for a Paycheck is the book's name. So the effect is incredibly important that we take note of that, and we need to understand then, is this only the case when we are working in person together, or is this also true for when we are working remotely? One aspect is definitely that the in-person conflict, we are more shielded from the in-person conflict, or as we would call it, the in real life conflict. Unfortunately, we've also seen that virtual is basically a kind of an illusory band-aid, since the conflict can also be potentially magnified exactly because of the fact that we are not seeing each other. So even though I'm not in the office, and the person that irritates me is perhaps not sitting across me and being nasty or not having manners when they have lunch, but also since we are now working remotely and collaborating remotely, we also find that the conflict is actually potentially magnified because we don't see each other's nonverbals. We don't know what a person means with their email. And also what we find in this, I mean, if you look at just the findings from Discovery and the WhatsApp calls, WhatsApp messages, and the news that went out, what was it, yesterday, where the virtual tools that we use to collaborate, like WhatsApp, or the virtual tools that we use to collaborate, like Teams, Slack, any of those, are sometimes even used to be, or what we would call is weaponized to work against other colleagues. So where some of examples may be in a luggage company called Amway, which I'm sure you know, who use Slack as a public arena to bully, intimidate, and guilt trip workers, where the teams in themselves, that was the way in which they were engaging with each other. So yes, toxicity, unfortunately, is also something that becomes e-borne. It may be in different pockets, and in real life conflict, we are shielded from that, but definitely overall toxicity can go viral and is virtually viral as well. So how do we then help build high-performing virtual teams, since it is so incredibly important and we actually don't have a choice? There are three things that I want to share with you, and I'm not going to go into all three of the detail of all three of them, but perhaps for you to just have as a reference point is, the first one is that we need to get the basics right. What do we mean with that? We need to know who's in the team and what the roles are in the team. We need to know what the technology is that we are using and use it effectively. We need to have an agreement about how we work from home and what those arrangements are and what works and what won't work for some members. What is the setup of our team members, for example? We need to understand meetings and how we will do meetings, performance management and the learning and development, even if we are working remotely, is still as important, probably even more important than when we are working at the office. So getting the basics right is probably one of the most important key steps that we need to look at firstly, which I'm not going to talk about today, but about which I'm sure you already have a lot of information available in any way. The second one is that we need to nurture individual and team resilience. We need to look at the individuals themselves, but we also need to view the team as an individual or as a whole, and make sure that we also ensure that the team stays and grows more resilient over time. Mental health and wellness is currently top of mind, I'm sure in any way in Discovery, and what we're seeing the effect is on people, and just from a medical aid perspective even, the effect of mental health and wellness and remote and the current scenario is quite a tall order. And as a team, we need to make sure that our team is able to weather the storm. So whether it's the individuals in the team, but also as a collaboration or as an entity, the team itself can grow stronger. So that is why it's important to connect. That's why it's important to also have fun together. But I will talk a little bit about that just now as well. And then also the surveys and things like that you are doing in any way, the engagement, etc. Very important to keep on doing those. The third point is to cultivate a healthy team culture, and this is really what I want to just spend the rest of the time that we have together to talk about, is how do we then cultivate a healthy team culture? And having looked at the research, having worked with teams as well, and seeing what the struggles are, for me it really comes down to three significant key points that we need to ensure that we keep having a focus on it, that we keep bringing it into our space as a team, that we keep on putting energy into that so that we don't lose sight of building that healthy team culture. And those three things is trust, psychological safety, and team norms. Now, if we think about something like trust, it may seem a simple concept, but actually we find that if we don't have trust in a team, we are not really a team, because we are just coordinating. It's almost like a couple getting divorced, if I have to use that example, but they have children and they have to coordinate time with each other in terms of who's picking up who when, but there is no real team anymore in how they collaborate. So they don't truly collaborate, they just merely coordinate. So if we think about teams, it's the same there. We have to have that trust. Simon Sinek talks about a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. So managers are often quite skeptical that trust can be established in a virtual environment. After all, how can we trust people that we don't see and we don't connect with on a regular basis in person? So we have to therefore make sure that the interactions we have virtually are also able to help us grow and build the trust. And Gartner's research actually shows that organizations with high levels of trust will also increase their average employee engagement by 76%. Over those of low levels of trust. So if we pull that through to teams, we know that the same will go. If we have teams with higher levels of trust, the engagement will be higher and the team will also perform better. So we have to establish that trust. It's vital. So if I can share a few pointers perhaps on how do we then build trust in virtual teams. Some of these things would be things that you are doing already. But I tried to just cluster it here in perhaps a few pockets of things that we need to do. On the one hand, what do we need to be? Secondly, what do we need to value? Thirdly, what do we need to have as a team? And then what do we need to get from the team as team members? So if we look at what we need to be as a team, or as individuals in the team as well, and definitely as the leader of the team, is that there needs to be dependability. We need to be reliable ourselves, and we need to rely on the members of the team to be dependable. So people are there in those teams because they're supposed to be there, and we have to trust that they're supposed to be there, or then make sure, as I said, getting the basic right, the people who are part of the team needs to be the right people so that we can trust each other and rely on each other in terms of what we do. Secondly, the commitment or the consistency, is quite important. And that really just goes around doing what we say and saying what we do. We treat each other with respect. We are not the one day in a bad mood and the next day in a different, and no one knows what to expect, but we really stay consistent, and we can also trust in that consistency with each other in terms of being mature in our interactions with each other. Congruency also goes to the meaning what you do and doing what you say, and the accountability obviously goes to really just giving each other, taking up the responsibility, being accountable for the responsibility, understanding that others are trusting us to take accountability and delivering on what we need to do. So those would be the pocket of things that we need to do be in order to build trust. What we need to value are firstly the connection and the interpersonal relationships. So the connection bit is very important, and when we work virtually, we need to make sure that we actually put a lot of potentially more effort into that than we would when we're at the office, because we don't have the water cooler, we don't have the corridor meetings, we don't have hanging around after or before meetings to connect with each other. So that connection bit is very important, and specifically because we know that if you know people, if you know your neighbors, their dogs will not bark that loudly. So we build trust with people that we actually know a little bit more of, which means that we need to also share about ourselves, which goes then to the next point, which is the reciprocity, where we actually also give back and share into the team. Not that we have to wear our heart on our sleeves, but as a leader, perhaps if we are struggling with something, to also put that on the table and say, I don't have the answers, or I'm really finding this difficult. What else can we do? The transparency is very important. So people read into what we don't say, things, if we don't put it on the table. So we need to rather say, this is what I can share with you, this is what I cannot share with you, than having that almost as an elephant on the virtual meeting table. Everyone is aware of it, but no one knows how to talk about it. So be transparent about what can be discussed and what can't be discussed, so that people are clear. And then again, the accountability that we need to value or then drive in the team. Having confidence in each other, having confidence in who we are in the team, having confidence that people will deliver is a big aspect, as well as having the fun together. And that's where remote team building exercises or having having social gatherings in some shape or form is really important. Tiny Campfires, for example, is a company in the US who have these little tea lights with marshmallows, and they do all kinds of team building exercises with these little tea lights and marshmallows because they're having a campfire exercise. So there's so many wonderful ideas and tools out there that one can use, and I'm sure you are already using a lot of them. And then get the collaboration tools, which goes back to the basics that I spoke about earlier, but to have effective collaboration tools. Select the applications that will support the team. Especially when we are working remotely, it is crucial that people can connect, that we don't have all these frustrating times where there's no signal or whatever else the reality may be, or the signal is bad, and to just have that understanding for each other in terms of what we need to do and what we are collaborating on. And then commitment as the last point there. What I mean with that is just to get commitment from the team in terms of what we are doing. Understanding that we are committed towards working towards a certain goal, that we are committed towards achieving certain aspects, and that we need to make sure that as a team we are on our way there. So getting that commitment, and for people to be vocal about it. So that's a bit for trust. If we go to psychological safety, psychological safety is a concept coined by a lady called Christine Porath, and they've done a lot of research, probably about 20 years worth of research, about what is psychological safety and why it's important. In a nutshell, psychological safety concerns the shared employee perceptions around the consequences of their actions. So is it safe for me to brainstorm with you and the idea won't be, taken wrong? Or if I try something out and it goes wrong, will I be blamed? Because that is unfortunately where, if people are feeling that it's not a psychological safe environment, they will not share new ideas, they will not brainstorm, they will not try things out, which you can just imagine it means that innovation doesn't, we can't be innovative, we can't be creative, we won't try new ideas, because if things go wrong, we start to blame each other. Therefore, we will avoid contributing because there's a fear of making mistakes. So on the left-hand side is the psychological danger cycle, and on the right-hand side it's the psychological safety cycle, which is really the cycle that we want to want to grow and foster in virtual teams in order to make sure we build that healthy culture. If we have a psychological dangerous environment, it means that there will be lots of silences, especially in meetings, and psychological safety and trust is really so important to just drive, as I say, the healthy team culture. Diversity, respect, things like that. I know that often have people rolling their eyes perhaps, but it is so important if you look at what a healthy team culture can actually set a team up to be able to achieve. So we should really make a pertinent point of making psychological safety an agenda on a team's point, on a team's agenda, an agenda point on a team's calendar, to make sure that they also spend attention or make sure that we achieve psychological safety. How do we build psychological safety? If you're the team leader, it helps to specifically pay attention to those first 2 points, which are role clarity and peer support. Psychological safety is actually very strongly associated with role clarity and peer support specifically. And you can probably see the logic in this, because if you have a good understanding of what is expected of you on the job, you feel encouraged by your colleagues, you may feel more confident to speak up. and you are also then more supportive of others when they speak up. And then thirdly there, although it's not as significant as the other two, was interdependence as well, where a team is perhaps interdependent on each other for delivering on a role or delivering on certain goals. There will also be an opportunity to build that psychological safety more so than teams that are perhaps individual contributors. If we have a learning orientation, it also means that we are open to hear what are new ideas, different ways of doing. And then, of course, the positive leader relations is very important, because the leader will be the one that actually makes sure that the team, what is expected and appreciated and warranted in the team as if how we work together. So the building the psychological safety will then be part of the culture that they drive. When we look at what really, also from a perspective of what causes root culture failures, there are many factors that play a role here, and a significant role here. But why I'm putting the third thing up then there as the third element, as norms, and the healthy team norms as an important part of building a healthy culture, is because research have found that the root cause of culture failures are often that we don't have norms and practices in place. And specifically, we don't have effective ways of working together. So if we look at team norms then as the third element of building teams, we know that team norms, as per Hogan, consist of composition norms. That's how we are, set up as a team, who is in the team. Then the interpersonal norms as well as the operational norms. The composition norms and the operational norms are typically the two that are fairly stagnant and one can easily sort of deal with in a virtual environment. Unfortunately, it's the interpersonal norms that deteriorates most often or most quickly when we are working virtually and we don't pay specific attention to it. So when we just focus on interpersonal norms, we know that we need to pay attention to the primary factors that would impact those interpersonal norms, and that is how do we deal with conflict, it's how do we communicate, and it's also how we collaborate. So if we just very quickly talk about conflict, we know that there's task conflict, there's personal conflict, and task conflict is who does what, what is whose role, what is whose responsibility. But the personal conflict is more the politics. And that is exactly as to the point earlier, it may be less pertinent in a virtual work environment. But if it has been there before, or if it starts popping up in the virtual environment, it actually is it can really cause a lot of havoc. So we need to manage both the interpersonal and the task conflict by making sure the interpersonal conflict by making sure that we don't leave things unattended, that we actually address it very quickly, to not be judgmental in observations, to ask open-ended questions, many things that we can talk about in terms of conflict. But the most important key point I can provide here is to not leave it hanging, and to really make sure that it is sorted out, because it will grow under the virtual radar, if I can call it that, very quickly if we leave it unattended. If we look at belonging specifically as the next point there, people have a need to connect and to contribute and to be considered. So if we just put that on with virtual teams, that is obviously where we need to pay our attention. How do we make sure that there is connection? When we start the meeting, we don't just jump into the agenda, but we actually connect with each other and ask how we are doing, which is something we naturally do when we are seeing people in person. Although I also have found that some teams would now start giving feedback that they're actually now doing more of that since they are working virtually, that they are really actually connecting with each other on different points. So if we look at communication, that really goes to the digital skills, and things like physical distance versus operational distance, and emotional distance when we communicate and collaborate are really things that we need to be aware of and pay attention to. But we can talk for many hours, I suppose, about these things. I think the main pointer for me here is don't push the conflict under the carpet. And as far as the collaboration goes, make sure that you connect enough and that you actually turn up the volume of that connection enough so that people, that we don't let the challenges of working virtually negatively impact those interpersonal norms too much, because those are the ones that we really need to pay attention to mostly. This point really just for me goes to say that in all of this, we have two parties. We have a few parties, I suppose. We've got the leaders, we've got the organization, we've got team members, etc. But the leaders, even if we are working virtually, are also the ones that will inevitably have to set the tone. They are the ones that can stop things if it is going wrong. They are the ones that can say, this is not the way we're going to do this. So if the leaders themselves are, and the example that I have there of sad, bad, and mad leaders really goes to the kind of potentially toxic leaders that we may have in an organization. Of course, there are many effective leaders as well, but this is just an example of the toxic ones. If the leaders in the teams are either sad, bad, or mad, unfortunately, the tone that they will set will not be the one that will help establish or refuel the virtual team in the positive sense. So having the right leaders in the team, or as a leader, being very honest with yourself is important. As a team member, it is also important because followership, as we know, is very important, and we can also collaborate outside of the leader, and especially when we start collaborating on virtual tools, or using the virtual tools to weaponize virtual tools to engage with team members against the leader, etc., then we're also setting that leader up for failure. So both those entities are very important, but the leader is the one that really has the mandate to be able to address and surface issues if they do appear, or if they are going on under the surface. Followers or teams really have a few expectations from leaders, and specifically they expect things like integrity, good judgment, competence, and vision. So if leaders can do that, and they can, try to really help the team to be as effective as they can be, then we also see that that is actually what will determine whether you are a good leader or not, and not merely the fact that you are, named as such based on your job role or your job description. So we really need to be aware of that and cognizant of that, and make sure that we create followers that really want to follow us, because that is ultimately what leadership is about, as Peter Drucker puts it. In this point, I think it's important for leaders to not forget the importance of providing direction and purpose to people. Specifically, my question here would be to my team members, but also to yourself as a leader and as a team member. What is your reason for getting up in the morning? What is your real purpose of the team? What is the purpose of this team in the bigger whole of discovery, and what is your reason for being? The Japanese call it your ikigai, your reason for getting up in the morning. So it would be wonderful if teams are able to, in their sleep, answer what would be what their ikigai is, because what we see is if there is a purpose to what we do as a team and as an individual within that team, then we don't sit with this Sisyphean cycle, as is depicted in the picture there, where Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, was actually punished by the god Hades to, for eternity, roll this boulder up the hill and then just have it roll back down. So there was no purpose in any effort. And if a team is sitting with that idea, or an individual in a team is sitting with that as their reality of the day, then it doesn't matter what you do in terms of trying to build the healthy team culture, you're going to struggle with that. So purpose, very important as part of that process, and therefore strongly positioned by the leader as well. So what should team leaders do? Team leaders need to really commit to building the trust, the psychological safety, and the healthy team norms. And we need to commit to do that in a virtual manner. And being aware of the fact, or being very cognizant of the fact, that there may be other challenges to doing it virtually, but we really have to focus on doing that and make it work. And it is possible. So what works for your team? And then do it. Secondly, we need to also live the commitment. As a team, as a leader, we need to show the way, and we need to walk, what we say, what we do, and do what we say. And be very open to feedback. That's the third point. If we can invite that feedback in, can see what is not working, and then to be able to, at number 4, actually adjust and improve on that commitment. We have a winning recipe where we will be able to have a positive cycle going upwards rather than a negative one going downwards, where we can improve on the commitment, become a learning team, a learning organization, and find what doesn't work, change it, because we have a psychologically safe environment where we can actually experiment, change it, and do something new, and that nothing is sacred. So those, there shouldn't be any holy cows. And as a team leader, we need to also have that vulnerability to say, it's okay, we don't have all the answers. Team members, at the same time, need to make sure that they are contributing team members, that they understand what the expectations are of them, that they're clear on that. So check the expectations, check your assumptions, help by speaking up in meetings. I'm sure that everyone will agree that it is very frustrating if you are chairing, for example, a meeting, and people are simply silent, and you don't see faces, and you don't know what they are, if they're actually doing meetings or if they are actually checking the emails. So that goes to the focus in meetings as well. We need to afford people the respect that they, in terms of having a moment to speak. Then let's rather have shorter meetings that are focused than have long unfocused meetings. As an individual team member, we also have a responsibility to build our own resilience and grit, and to speak up if we feel that we are not able to do so, or there's specific things that are standing in our way. So whether it is with HR, or whether it is with our team leader, or even with our peers and colleagues, that we really focus on building that our own resilience, especially in this time. Because ultimately you can only take responsibility for your own mental health and well-being as well. And then to set those boundaries. What I mean with boundaries is really, because we have an integrated, or a work-life integrated space at the moment, which a lot of it may stay similar in future, that we create those boundaries for ourselves at home. And I'm sure you have already started doing a lot of that as well in your teams. In summary, therefore, virtual teams do have accentuated performance challenges. That is just a reality that there is. It has been there before. It is just now maybe more pertinent because everyone is more aware of it. Virtual teams do have accentuated performance challenges, but those are not unsurmountable challenges. And there are fortunately very clever ways to work with them, and we need to use the technology, etc., to help us with that. And replicate in person as closely as possible. Trust, psychological safety, team norms are really key to building a healthy virtual culture, and we need to make sure that we pay particular attention to them. And in this process, the leader will need to set the tone, the leader will need to guide the way, and the team members need to make sure that they are active and positive team members as well, because without the followers, there is no team. And then also, as I said lastly, to be a learning team, meaning that we try new things, we give each other feedback on what didn't work, and we implement what worked. And we so go on this positive cycle of being a learning team, a learning organization, which means there will be more innovation, which of course in the world we are living in at the moment, and which we are, moving into in the future as well, will help us as teams and as organizations also to better deliver on our promise to our clients.